Good morning. I'm Peter Hanley, the Executive Director of the American Center for School Choice, and welcome to May Superman Pray, the role of faith-based schools in school choice. We want to thank you all for coming. Many of you have come a long ways to be here, and we greatly appreciate it. Let me just remind people to turn off the cell phones so we don't have unexpected interruptions. Let me just do a few thank yous and recognitions for people that have made this happen. We've been working with four great student groups from the Bolt Law School. First one was the Bolt Jewish Student Association. Danielle Serbin, the president. Is Danielle here? She may not be here yet. The Bolt Muslim Student Association, Yasser Ali, the president. And Yasser was traveling and picked up a virus, and we're not sure whether he's going to make it. He sent me an email last night and said he was going to try. Christians are Catholics at Bolt. Todd Hutchins, I've seen Todd. Todd, are you? There's Todd right in the back. And Christians at Bolt, Michelle Rosendahl. Michelle, just stand up, right in the back. And I especially want to welcome other UC Berkeley students present here today. Do we have some that have shown up already? If you could just stand up.
No students.
Too early for students. Oh, there's one. Yeah. Thank you. The board of the American Center has been instrumental in making this conference happen, inspiring it, helping it along, giving me advice and good direction. Jack Coons, our chair right here. Fawn Spady, our vice chair, right there. Tom Brady, our treasurer. Over there, he's been helping to check everybody in. Make sure you get in the right place. John Gray, our secretary. John, right in the back there. Michael Guerra. There's Michael. Steve Sugarman.
Steve's here.
There. And Joe Viteritti. There. Please look for any one of us during the day if you have any problem, need anything. We want to make this day go as smoothly as possible for you, and we're here to help you. We have convened this faith-based school summit because we believe the time is right to advance school choice significantly, and we need the faith-based communities in the arena advocating for programs that will empower families to choose how they educate children. But the title is May Superman Pray, not Must Superman Pray. This is a choice in the faith communities that you must make. I come to the American Center with a decade in the school choice movement. But I want to posit a question for you to think about as we go through the day. With the power of the logic that favors school choice and the weaknesses we all see in the education system, why isn't the school choice movement in a stronger position today? Frankly, why haven't we taken over education? I love choice of all kinds. As a school board member, I've championed programs like small learning communities and the International Baccalaureate program in my schools. I've worked to make the world safe for good charter schools. I worked to pass Prop 38 a few years ago, the most recent California voucher initiative. I believe more choice will improve the efficiency of the system, probably reducing costs. I believe more choice will improve academic outcomes as parents can readily withdraw their children from ineffective schools. But these have not been enough to advance us very far down the road, and they encounter fierce and bloody policy battles for every inch of progress we make. I know, like many of you, I've been in plenty of those battles. We at the American Center believe it's time to bring this debate to the center, to remove it from the ideological battles that too often have resulted in stalemate or outright defeat. It ought, in our judgment, to be about empowering parents and families with the authority and responsibility to choose how their children are educated. Virtually everywhere else in American life, our traditions reinforce the authority and responsibility of the parents to care for their children. Yet in education, government severely limits or sometimes just completely strips away that authority. Empowering parents with educational choice is compelling, and it's difficult to counter. This summit will examine the effects of school choice on families, analyze the political and legal opportunities to advance school choice, and bring faith-based school leaders and advocates together to assess what it means for them. Through the day, please think about how making the empowerment of parents a central theme of the choice movement could be a game changer for our movement. Think about what the next steps will be. You've all received a copy of a book that Jack Koons and Steve Sugarman wrote a number of years ago, but is still highly relevant, we believe. It gives different kinds of options for school choice programs, and we encourage you to take a look at that. But now let's get to the first panel. If I could have the first panelists just come up here and take their seats. And let me introduce Michelle Rosendahl, who is going to be one of the co-moderators, along with our chair, Jack Koons.
Here comes. Bring all the women on the left wing.
Good morning. My name is Michelle Rosendahl, and I'm the facilitator of Christians at Bolt, one of 4 faith-based student groups at the law school. Today, it's my honor and privilege to introduce our first speaker, Kathryn Ascencio, who is a mother of 4 children. Kathryn and her husband have made the education of their children the highest priority, but at times they have lacked the financial resources they needed to make sure that this could happen. But through the generosity and scholarships provided by the Basic Fund, Kathryn and her husband have been able to put 4 children through Catholic school. So here she is to tell you more about her story.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Kathryn Ascencio. I am a parent, a basic parent, and an instructional assistant and president of the school board at St. Elizabeth Elementary School in Oakland. And I came from a loving and supportive, moderate income family. I am the youngest of 5 children, none of whom have graduated from college. Neither have I graduated from college yet. My husband, Jose Luis, and I met while volunteering at the Oakland Catholic Worker. It is a house of hospitality at that time for Salvadoran and Guatemalan refugees. He is from El Salvador, a lover of education and a leader of students at a time when student leaders were being disappeared, tortured, and killed. And he was forced to leave school 3 months prior to graduating from high school. He is a contractor, a poet, and a loving husband and father. When we, while living and working in Oakland, started to grow our family, school choice was at the forefront of our minds. We were looking for a community of faith, a diverse community. I came from a predominantly white community. We were looking for a diverse community of faith, a safe environment, and a nurturing environment. And when I say safe, I'm not talking about metal detectors at the school entrance. We are now the proud parents of 4 wonderful girls. Maria Elena graduated from St. Elizabeth Elementary School and attended both Bishop O'Dowd and St. Joseph Notre Dame High School. Here's a little surprise. She's the responsible and loving mother of an almost 3-year-old son, Miguel Angel. Let me tell you, when your daughter's 15 years old, you don't really expect that kind of announcement. And yet being part of a loving school community that supports you through these moments in life, that's priceless. And she, despite being a pregnant teen, graduated a year early from high school, and she now attends Laney College. Ana Gabriela is a sophomore at Holy Names High School. An Achieve Scholar, she is a very motivated and self-disciplined academic, a published poet, writer, public speaker, artist, and athlete. Sofia Catarina is in the 8th grade at St. Elizabeth Elementary School, and we've just received word that she too has been accepted into the Achieve program as an Achieve Scholar. She's an excellent student, a musician, a leader, comedian, photographer, costume designer, and an accomplished volleyball player with 5 years of school and club experience under her young belt. Teresa Isabel is in the 4th grade at St. Elizabeth Elementary School. She loves school. She's an honor roll student, a trumpet player, Lord have mercy, volleyball, and a basketball player. So I want to speak a moment about choice, our choice to enroll our children in our local Catholic elementary school. I love the notion of the neighborhood public school. I grew up in a public school. Unfortunately, in East Oakland, that was not an option for our children. Access to a quality Catholic education has made nothing less than a radical, salvific difference in the life of our family. It has enabled our family to stay, plant roots, grow strong, and build community by helping others in East Oakland, where unfortunately, like I said, the public schools are not an option for us. Basic provided the opportunity to watch our beautiful children blossom in the fertile soil that is the St. Elizabeth School community, to bask in the joy of their spiritual, academic, artistic, and athletic accomplishments, to live in the hope that our 4 girls will graduate from college, to live in the fullness of God's blessings within the community of faith that informs, nourishes, and provides guidance for our family's spiritual journey. Basic has enabled me to get closer to my goal of finally earning that bachelor's degree and moving from instructional assistant to 8th grade teacher. It has enabled me to continue to discover and learn, to be challenged, to share my gifts of time and talent, and to explore my vocation at St. Elizabeth Elementary School. But perhaps even more poignantly, the opportunity to choose our children's schools, to have access to, equal access to a quality education, to the arts, has provided a unique and overwhelming opportunity for Jose Luis. The profound satisfaction upon seeing his children reap the benefits of their dedication and hard work. These are benefits that he as a student was stripped of. I'd like to conclude my comments at this point with a poem that my daughter Ana Gabriela recently wrote, and say something first. Last summer, as an Achieve Scholar, she is required to do an internship or work during the summer. She, through the Achieve program, which she reached by being supported in our school of choice for her in elementary school, she learned of a science and math program at Smith College in Massachusetts. My then 14-year-old had never been on a plane until that point, and yet she lived and studied in Massachusetts all summer, last summer. This summer, she's applying to the math and science program at Stanford University. So when I speak of salvific, I mean from going from generations of people who did not go to college to making a radical jump to a whole new generation of college graduates. Here's her poem. It's entitled, Here I Am. Here I am. I can hear. I hear the soothing voices of the people I love. I can see. I see the looks on people's faces as they stare as they walk by. I can feel. I feel the soft touch of loving hands as they wipe away tears of frustration from my face. And though I can't speak well, inside I speak so loud and clear that my voice touches everyone in its path. Inside, I am just like you. I yearn to run on the beach, sun on my face, sand in my toes. I dream that one day, when we fly into heaven on wings of gold, that you will see us as equals. I hope that every time you see me, you don't think, how sad, or what a pity. Know that I am blessed. Blessed with a family who accepts me, cherishes me, loves me. I was meant for this world. So here I am. Thank you.
A little side up here. It's a little loose out there. You'd think this was a Catholic crowd or something. You're all sitting in the back. If you have any inclinations to get up here in these earlier tables, you're always welcome. I'm Jack Coons. I'm the chair. Won't do much except to say thank you, of course, to our execs over the last few years. Mike Guerra, where are you? Who most of you know, I'm sure, from previous calamities. And the man next to me, no, where are you, Peter? There you are. Peter, who has struggled to put together what is certainly the most amazing collection of people with open hearts and open minds and nothing to gain but success with what we're about. I am to introduce some speakers very briefly, but first, I just want to say that you have made me very, very proud to be a part of this enterprise. You are a very special bunch of people. I have on my left three, we worry about Superman. I have on my left three super folk who represent Krypton and come here with ideas that ought to be very special in the discussion, in the discourse about choice in the years ahead. Joe Viteritti and Charlie Glenn and Darla Romfo all have their biographies in your pack, so I'm not going to go through them much. Joe, who will be first, writes, of course, on church and state and on Catholic schools and on all kinds of schools, all kinds of religious schools, and the First Amendment. He writes faster than I can read, as does his successor, Charles Glenn. Charles is a prodigious producer of interesting insights into countries all over the world. He's written all about European systems and the degree of choice. He's now writing about Muslim schools and about Native American schools. So that's Joe, and that's Charlie, and then Darla. Darla Romfo is a kind of prodigy. Happily, she's a lawyer. Happily for my sense of camaraderie, you are so few. But in any event, she has turned her law experience and her government experience into becoming one of the most amazing generators of generosity from her fellow New Yorkers and others for children who are looking for a way to get into a good school, and their parents who will decide. So I'm just going to introduce them all. Joe It's your wisdom first. I will say in general, these people are talking about premises for the day, so there may be something deep here that we will soon discover. Joe?
They may or they may not.
They may not. Now, there's other sides to these stories.
Thanks, Jack. What I'd like to do, this is the second meeting we've had, large meeting of the American Center for School Choice. What I'd like to do is talk about some of the fundamental principles that brought us together as a group, as a member of the board. Much of this is attributed to the work of Jack and Steve Sugarman and the work they've done on the issues of school choice. There are some very basic foundation principles that I think we share. Today is an attempt to widen the tent and to bring in people who are involved in the choice movement who I think are in basic agreement with us, but there may be also differences among us. And as we try to build, if this is a coalition building session, which I think it is, and I'm not a political strategist, I'm an academic, but there are some basic principles we have to deal with that I don't think will make it impossible for us to work with, but are things that we have to address. And so as we try to scope out the day, I'd like to talk about some of these principles and use it as a basis for the rest of the conversation today. Most of us who come to this through Jack's work see choice as a moral proposition. It's premised on the idea that choice exists already for most middle-class children. The question is, why shouldn't it exist for everyone? And the situation we have in this country is that choice is limited to the middle class, who have the ability either to purchase a private school education or who have the mobility to move to areas where the public schools are better. Poor people don't have that. And the second part of the moral proposition is that it's just unfair and it's fundamentally indefensible to confine poor children to schools that don't work, and most of them are there. I think there are three.
Joe,
Why is this happening?
let's try it a little further.
I think there are three basic camps in the choice movement. One is those people who support public school choice, and that involves inter-district choice programs and charter schools, which are growing. And then there's the private school group, people who support vouchers for private schools or tax credits for private schools, which might include religious schools. And I think in that group, in that second group, there are two subdivisions. There are what I would call the market people, and there would what I would call the equity or social justice argument. And I don't mean to insinuate that the market people don't have a social justice agenda. The things that separate those two groups is that, generally speaking, the people who focus on the market approach believe in universal choice, and those of us who focus on the equity approach really see choice as a way of enhancing the opportunities of poor children. So we basically support targeted choice at poor kids. I think the market people, generally speaking, tend to have are less welcoming of government accountability, and I think those of us in the second group believe that government accountability is important. That doesn't mean government bureaucracy and government ability to prevent anything useful from happening in a school, which also happens in public schools. We used to be able to say that the political realities kind of bring us to the point where the second approach is more feasible, because most of the voucher programs we've seen in private schools tend to be targeted. Those in Ohio, those in Wisconsin, that which is struggling in the District of Columbia, and prior programs which we had in there is a debate going on in Milwaukee now about broadening the targeted program to make it a universal program, and it's caused a real split in the choice community there between people like Howard Fuller, who supports targeted choice, and Susan Mitchell, who's gone to support general choice or choice for everyone with vouchers. This is an issue that I think we're going to have to discuss. I don't think it's irreconcilable, but I think these kinds of things are the kinds of things that need to be resolved if there's going to be a broad-based approach. I know Andrew is here from Cato, and he and I probably differ on that, but I think Andrew and I also share a lot of things. We were talking last night, a lot of things we do agree on. The question arises, why religious schools? A lot of people in the charter movement say, well, since charters are doing so well, why do we have to bother with vouchers? They're impractical anyway. We would say that religious schools are important because, first of all, they give people an opportunity to choose schools that reflect their religious traditions. One of the basic principles of this organization is empowering families. And one of the things that makes a family a powerful institution is the ability of parents to bring up their children in a moral context that reflects their own values. And if that family is religious and they don't have an opportunity to have their child educated in a religious environment, it could compromise the way they want to bring up their child. So if you really believe in the family as a basic institution, religious schools are an important option for those who want them. They're also a way for us to increase the opportunities for choice that are far too infrequent for poor families, even with the rise of charter schools and with all the programs that we have running, privately supported voucher programs and publicly supported voucher programs and tax credit programs. There's still inadequate opportunities, insufficient number of opportunities for poor kids. And so this is very much important to us who see this as a social justice agenda and which is really there to what we care most about, those of us who identify with this, and I don't claim to be speaking for everybody on the board here, I'm just speaking for myself, we're really focused on improving opportunities for poor kids. And we can debate which are the better ways to do it. I don't think anybody in this group opposes improving opportunities for poor kids, but it's a question of priority. I think we do agree on some basic, we do agree with where the Supreme Court is today, the Zellman decision, which allows, at least under the First Amendment, children to attend religious schools with public support. We agree with the basic values that were defined in that decision in 2002. I will mention them. I know we have a serious discussion on this afternoon. But if a program has a valid secular purpose, if it's neutral with regard to religion, and if the child is supported as a result of a choice of the parent, it's a good thing. We like particularly the last principle, and I think most of us in this room would support that. We also would have a problem with the existence of Blaine amendments that exist in state constitutions now, which have become more of a constitutional prohibition against these programs than the First Amendment. Since the First Amendment obstacle has been overcome, we believe, and there's no indication that this court is about to move in another direction, I don't think. There are others who can speak this afternoon. The Blaine Amendment is still a serious problem, and some of us who have written on this are disappointed with a decision that came down 2 years later by the court in 2004, which basically did not look at the opportunity to overcome Blaine amendments. And many of us see it as both Blaine amendments as a violation of equal protection and even maybe a violation of free exercise. We can talk a little bit about that later. The political reality is that the choice movement has taken off in such a way that most of it is in most of the progress we've seen is in the charter school area. You know, they're in 40 states now and growing. Many people in the private school sector have looked towards religious charter schools. That's kind of a contradiction, as an alternative, which is really religious charter schools as charter schools that are started by religious groups that are run as secular schools. I have mixed feelings about it. I think it's, in some ways, losing the religious mission of those schools is a real loss. But on the other hand, creating any school of choice that can help kids get a better education is a movement in the right direction. I also think it raises some suspicions in some areas that could be somewhat controversial. I think it kind of goes to the heart of what the title of this conference is, May Superman Pray. Superman may pray if Superman is running a religious school. Superman may not pray in a public school or in a charter school that's started by a religious group. The way the court has seen school prayer is it does allow moments of silence, but any suggestion that the school administration is supporting prayer or coercing students into prayer is seen as problematic under the law, and I agree with those laws. I think that the whole area of religious charter schools is going to need a lot of our attention. I think there are some trade-offs involved with it. I think there are some risks involved in it. I feel somewhat ambivalent about them, but I guess I'm kind of moving in the direction that if we can create more schools of choice for kids that are run by people who know what they're doing, it's probably a good thing. I think there are lots of other arguments we can get into around this. I don't want to use up more time than I've been allotted. I think there are lots of debates going on about the roles of unions in education. I think that those of us who have been involved in the school choice wars know the importance of opposing unions when we think unions are wrong. I'm not one who think we need to end unions. I'm not one who think we ought to end collective bargaining. Again, I speak for myself, not for my board. And I think we need to be careful how we go down that path. I do think it's important that we disagree when it's necessary to disagree, but I don't see myself as an anti-union guy who wants to undo unions. So I guess I'll end on that note, and I think it'll open up some conversations for the rest of the day, and I look forward to hearing from everyone else. Thank you.
Charles Glenn.
Okay, I can squeeze by here.
Thanks, Joe. That was splendid.
Oh.
Yeah, if you get too close, good. It goes frantic.
Okay, good. Well, good morning, everyone. We have 10 inches of snow in New England, which I just left, so I'm very happy to be here with you. I hadn't intended to say anything about my family, but the first speaker was so eloquent that I have to mention that I have 7 children, and all of them attended the Boston Public Schools because I was, for 21 years, in charge of desegregation and urban education for Massachusetts, and did not feel in conscience that I could take my own children out of the schools which I was seeking to make just and adequate for poor children whose families could not afford such a choice. However, as soon as I stepped down from that job in government, my children then, the later ones along, attended Catholic school and evangelical school and Eastern Orthodox school and various other variations. So I've had a rich experience of different kinds of schooling. We agreed last week that I would take my few minutes to, in effect, respond to the issues that Joe would raise. He and I are profoundly in agreement on fundamental questions, and let me then just elaborate a bit on his points. And particularly, I was asked to do so from the perspective of international comparisons, though, as my career indicates, most of my work has been committed to working within urban America. I've worked with Chicago and San Diego and many places around the country. So my interests are not simply international. The first point is that every Western democracy, except the United States and Greece, and to some extent Italy, provides public funding for the schools that parents choose, whether those schools be religious schools or private schools with a pedagogically distinct focus, or whether those be obviously schools operated by government. In 2004, a Belgian friend and I published a reference work in 3 volumes with chapters on 40 different countries, showing how those arrangements functioned in each of those countries. And we're just doing a new edition, which we intended to bring out in 2011, but quite honestly, many of the authors have been a little slow getting their chapters back. So it looks as though it's going to be 2012. However, we're bringing out the early profiles. For example, next month we're bringing out 8 of them in a special issue of the International Journal of Education, Law, and Policy. So that will include Finland, Malaysia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, France, Austria. I forget what the others are in this first tranche. So we're looking constantly at what is happening around the world. Now, what I think is interesting in relation to Joe's point is that in none of these countries has school choice been adopted as a strategy for applying market pressures to improve the quality of schooling. There is much talk about that in Sweden and in England and in New Zealand, but in effect that has not been the reason why the choice of schools is incorporated into the heart of these systems. Nor has it been for the reason that Joe and I would strongly support, which is to allow poor parents to make the same kinds of choices which, for example, my wife and I chose not to make when our children were small, but we could have made. That has not been the reason either. The reason in country after country after country has simply been that as a fundamental right of citizens, there is a right to decide where your children are going to be educated. And since World War II, that's been incorporated into international law, into the various international covenants, including a number that the United States has joined, which say that parents have a right to make decisions about the education and the religious upbringing of their children. This is just fundamentally established international law. And the United Nations Human Rights Commission, which is not I hasten to say, a terribly reputable group, I'm sorry to say, however, did issue a very good statement a few years ago, spelling out what the right to education consists of. And one of the 4, this is not the National Education Association rumbling off stage here, I hope.
So far as we know.
It's all right. Don't worry, Peter. I'm used to it. What one of the 4 aspects of essential elements in the right to education, I'm talking the right to education now, not the right to choice, was that education be acceptable to families and to students, right? Not only that it be adequate, it's not enough that a government ensure that the education is adequate, that it's accessible and so forth, but it must also be acceptable. That's a fundamental right, recognized in country after country. So that's my first point. It's a fundamental question of what is the human right that we owe. Secondly, I want to say a word about diversity and not the diversity. I teach a course on diversity and justice in education. It isn't that kind of diversity that I'm talking about. We often talk about biodiversity and the importance of maintaining it. I have a new book just coming out about the education of Native Americans. We talk about the value of maintaining languages, language diversity. I think we need to talk more about the value of maintaining diversity of educational options, that a healthy educational system is one which is characterized by a diversity of approaches to education. And this is, quite frankly, one of the great gifts that the charter school movement has brought to American education, and it is at the same time one of the great threats that the charter school movement has made to Catholic and evangelical schooling. I should just interject, I'm evangelical. I always end up speaking at occasions where much of the interest is with Catholic schools, but evangelical schools are a profound concern as well. Let me just read from my book that actually just was published this week, called Contrasting Models of State and School, because I can't remember these things. I'm an old man and I have to read things. In the Netherlands, which I write about here, at the elementary level, there are 17 different religious types of schooling that the government funds at the elementary level. These include Catholic, general Protestant, 4 varieties of more conservative Protestant, anthroposophic, that's Rudolf Steiner, Waldorf schools, Orthodox Jewish, liberal Jewish, Platonic, whatever that is, I find it fascinating, Rosicrucian, Orthodox Muslim, liberal Muslim, Orthodox Hindu, liberal Hindu, evangelical, and Herrnhuter. All of those are funded. In addition, the government funds Montessori schools, Dalton schools, Freinet schools, a whole variety of pedagogically based choices. That makes for an extraordinarily rich menu of education from which parents are free to choose. I think we need to celebrate the significance of that diversity. Now, one of the great threats to that diversity is the abandonment of clarity about what makes schools distinctive, which I'm afraid often happens with faith-based schools. And one of my books, the one called The Ambiguous Embrace, looks at how, in fact, often faith-based schools, whether or not they are receiving public funds, can slide into a kind of generic, often excellent, mission-driven, loving, whatever, but not something that you can clearly tie to a distinctive worldview, a distinctive way of understanding the world. And if faith-based schools go down that road, I think it becomes increasingly difficult to argue why we should be supporting them as opposed to charter schools, which can be all those things, if there's nothing that makes them distinctively religious in a way that makes them stand out. So I argued in The Ambiguous Embrace that it's essential that Catholic and evangelical and Jewish and other educators work very explicitly about what makes their schooling distinctive and how that has to work its way through every element of the school life. I disagree with Joe on one point, that I think it is possible to imagine, if that hard work is done, that hard intellectual work is done within the faith-based school communities, to use the charter school mechanism, which has won the ideological battles now and is widely accepted, to use that as a vehicle to continue to provide schooling which is imprinted, for example, I would say, from my evangelical perspective, with a distinctive biblical perspective on life, on what it means to be a mature human being, on what the purpose of study, what the purpose of work is, and a whole range of things which I think we can offer distinctively in evangelical schools. Now, I think we can do that without violating the 14th Amendment if we are careful to think through how that is worked out in the way in which the school operates. Larry Weinberg, whose work on this some of you know, actually wrote that as his doctoral dissertation working with me. Larry's an Orthodox Jew, and he makes the point that a charter school cannot, a charter school can certainly stand for something. In fact, every charter school, if it's any good, stands for some vision of what human flourishing is all about. And to say that the only kind of vision of human flourishing that cannot be endorsed and expressed by a charter school is a religiously based vision seems to me to run afoul of the Rosenberger decision of the Supreme Court, in which the court ruled that viewpoint discrimination could not be engaged in. Now, I'm not a law professor, and I'm sure there are others who will disagree with me here. And then my third and last point, which relates to the second. I may be the only person here who works in a school of education. I have a contract to write a book called The Genealogy of Bad Ideas in Education. The first of those bad ideas, by the way, is going to be the availability of the child. I traced that to Rousseau, that the educator basically is free to project onto the child anything he or she chooses to project, that the child brings with him or her nothing from the family or from nature which must be respected. The last, I won't go over all the points, the last of the bad ideas is schools of education. Now, I work in one, I'm very fond of my colleagues, I think we do a good job, but there's no question that schools of education, my own included, are harbors of ideologies which have been profoundly damaging to American education. By the way, my colleagues in Italian and Dutch and other universities say the same things about their education schools. Now, ideology so profoundly penetrates the way that we think about education in the United States. When I say we, I mean education school professors and the leadership of the education associations. I don't see the voucher battle, that is the public voucher battle, as one that can readily be won. I think the charter school battle is one that has been won. Even though the charter schools are still opposed by the unions and opposed by most education school professors, charter schools now have general acceptance in the country. So my strategy, and it may differ from some of you, is to see how we can tweak the regulations and the laws and the understandings under which charter schools operate, and at the same time strengthen the ability of faith-based schools and educators who are concerned with faith-based education to use the charter school mechanism in ways which has integrity and which preserves the existence of these schools. So let me conclude on that controversial note.
Thank you, Charles. Grand as ever. Did I mention that Charles has 7 children? And by the way, Darla, on your way up, would it be inappropriate for me to point out that you are from North Dakota, which I think is among the maybe the only solvent state in our 50. Well, there are now 4 following your example, and perhaps you can help us be the same.
That's usually my fun fact when people want the fun fact that I'm from North Dakota, because most people have never met anybody from North Dakota. Well, they asked me to talk today because they wanted to give a sort of a practical application of what's going on in the world of private school scholarships. And I think I will bring to it kind of a more sense of immediacy and urgency. I have to say, when I first saw the title of this, Can Superman Pray?, my thought was, he better learn how to, and quickly. There are 2 reasons why I believe that my comments will clearly support, and I think the others here do too, why that is necessary. First of all, there are thousands of empty seats in faith-based schools that could be filled with children whose parents want to make that choice today, and there are no intellectually honest reasons why we are denying them that choice. The second is the premise that everything that we do in education reform should stem from the fact that parents are the first educators of their children. And everything we do in education policy should support that, because if we don't, there's not enough government around, and we don't want them to be the only ones that are holding schools accountable. We want parents to be holding our schools accountable. We want them to hold their children accountable. So CSF has always been about putting power in the hands of parents, doing whatever we can and supporting whatever works to make parents the first educators of their children. By way of background, the Children's Scholarship Fund, which I don't know if most of you are here are probably familiar with it, I'll give you a little background. It was started in 1999 by John Walton and Ted Forsman. And the idea was to bring together a group of people from both sides of the aisle. It wasn't political, it wasn't for vouchers, it wasn't for any particular kind of school choice, it was for empowering parents. And they gave 40,000 scholarships for 4 years to low-income kids to go to private school for K through 8. There were 1,250,000 applications for 40,000 seats nationwide, and that was over a fairly short period of time. Once and for all, that sort of put the nail in the coffin that these families were satisfied with the options that they had. It was pretty clear that they weren't. And in fact, Checker Finn just recently said that 100 years from now, this will be one of the things people talk about as a charitable investment, because it proved this, it exposed this demand. And people have been pointing to it ever since, and it actually was sort of like the beginning of saying, you know what, these families, a lot of people used to think that these families didn't care about their kids. Well, it sort of showed once and for all they do care, and they're pretty smart about making choices if they're given the power to do it. So the most immediate thing we can do is put a scholarship in their hands so that we can make it possible for them to make that choice today. Since then, we and our partners around the country, one of them being the Basic Fund, have given away over 116,000 scholarships and over $400 million in scholarship funding. And our children largely attend the low-cost, low-tuition, inner-city schools, often faith-based. And these schools, as you know, many in this room, they've been successfully educating these children for decades. It was an idea that charters weren't the first ones to figure this out. In fact, I think that's what they looked to figure out that it was possible to do this. And that's one of the reasons I think it would be bad for all of us if these schools disappeared. There's still a misconception among many people that private schools are for the rich. And I'm still amazed when I take donors to a school and they'll say, how much is the tuition here? How much does it actually cost to educate? In New York City, and I'll cite a school later on when I'm talking, but just to point out the differences and the astonishment of donors, how can they do it for this amount of money? If we lose these places that are showing what's possible to do, I think it's bad for all of us and it's bad for the education system. These schools have high graduation rates, and they have successfully been closing the achievement gap between blacks and whites. And right now, you hear all the excitement about charters, but there's only 3% of the public school population that's being educated in charter schools. And we know they're not all high-quality charter schools. There are still 11% of children being educated in private schools. We know that too many children are still in underperforming seats. And in some cases, we've just traded away private seats for charter schools. In New York, for example, we've gained 55,000 charter school seats, but we've lost 57,000 private school seats in the last 10 years. Now, you would never think that was the case, given what you read in the papers and all the excitement about charters, and I applaud them as another means of choice, but we're not really gaining anything if we're losing high-quality private seats. And in New York, we probably still have another 500,000 kids sitting in underperforming seats. It's a little, you look at that and you say, we have to do something besides what we're doing now. New York is a place where there's also been considerable philanthropy thrown into the private school sector. I look at just the Catholic schools in Manhattan, Bronx, and Staten Island. In the last 10 years, there's probably been about $150 million, by my calculations, in private funding that's gone into those schools. During that same period of time, 10 schools have closed, another 20 are slated to close. But the number of kids served by the private schools has gone from over 50,000, the Catholic schools in those 3 boroughs has gone from over 50,000 to around 35,000. That's not a good thing overall. The sustainability of inner city schools really, it's called into question. I know we have pockets where it's happening, like in Memphis, but I think long-term, is it really possible to do this with philanthropy? And if we don't, if Superman doesn't learn how to pray, are we going to have these inner-city faith-based schools, low cost, that have been serving this population? And what happens to these kids? Can charters really scale up fast enough? I mean, I was on a panel with David Levin and the guy that runs Uncommon Schools, and those are really great charter schools. But they're looking by 2015, David said that they'd have 85,000 in the 3 networks that he was mentioning, which I think was Harlem Success, Uncommon Schools, and KIPP. That's 85,000 kids. We have 55 million kids in our, educated in our school system. That's just a drop in the bucket. Can we really afford to lose the private school sector that's doing such a good job of educating these kids? By comparison, in Florida, and you're going to hear from Doug later today, but if you look at what's happening there, they have tax credit scholarships, which often don't get, there's a big difference between tax credit scholarships and vouchers, and they don't get mentioned as much. They're much easier for private schools to navigate. They're much more flexible in terms of, and they're much easier to get passed. And in Florida, where they have passed, you've seen an increase in the number of kids that are educated in the private system. You've also seen they've done a number of other things there, and I'm sure Doug will talk about it much more articulately, but what you've seen is an overall improvement across all sectors in education, closing the achievement gap in amazing ways. So I think there are important reasons to look at all these different options and to be aggressive in pursuing them. To bring the story home about why the immediacy of this, I'm going to tell you about a school called Mount Carmel Holy Rosary in New York City. 98% of the students in this school qualify for free or reduced lunch. It's ethnically diverse, 54% African American, 38% Hispanic, 6% multiracial, 1% Asian, 1% non-Hispanic white. 67% of the students receive need-based scholarships. It has an after-school program. It has lots of access to music and the arts, and 100% of the kids are testing in 4th grade, proficient in math and English language, and in 8th grade, the percentages are up around 90%, and they have the kids coming in on Saturdays. They do a great job. It's one of the highest performing, if not the highest performing, better than the charter schools even in that area. So the interesting thing is that the New York City public school down the street, which is horrible, costs $21,000 to educate a child in that school. The charter schools get $13,000, and many of them also raise philanthropic dollars. I think KIPP raises around another $2,500 per child. This school, the cost to educate, all in, $6,300. Now, can we really afford to lose that as an option, given the fiscal constraints that we're up against? I mean, just as a practical solution. There are 37 empty seats in that school, and I found out in one of my recent visits that one of the children from Waiting for Superman, the Harlem Children's Zone, Jeffrey Canada's organization, is actually paying a scholarship for her to go to that school. She didn't get into a charter school. When I found out there are 37 empty seats and they're willing to pay tuition to go there, the only obstacle to 37 more kids going to that school, which is great, is money in politics. So can we really afford to let those 37 seats sit empty? I don't think so. I want to close by reading some comments that Archbishop Dolan, who's now actually head of the Catholic Conference of Bishops in the United States, he made these comments before the Joint Committee of the Budget in New York, and I want to read them because, first of all, it's great that a leader in the church and someone who's been up close to school choice in Wisconsin said these things, but it also sort of just captures everything that I just said in a much more articulate way, I think. It is in the area of parental choice that we see the gravest injustice perpetuated on families. No matter whether it's a family with children in public school or a family with children in a Catholic school, yeshiva, or some other independent school. Let me reiterate an argument that I know you've heard before. There are thousands of children trapped in chronically low-performing government schools, schools that have proven to be ineffective. The cost to the taxpayer and society in general is exorbitant. The cost to the family, in the form of shattered hopes and dreams and lost human potential, is far deeper and more painful. I stand with you in support of public schools, and I'm asking that our support be for all kids, because after all, we're educating the public. Whether it's in a private school or a public school, we're educating the public. Whether they're in government or independent schools, the leadership of the Public School Teachers Union has a vested interest in and a responsibility to support their members, the vast majority of whom are dedicated and hardworking teachers who deserve our support. However, the union's advocacy interests in this case conflict with the interests and needs of thousands of ordinary children and families. The majority of these families will continue to choose public schools for their children, but protecting jobs for adults justifies neither the burden on the taxpayer nor the violation of the rights of the child who are forced to remain in schools that don't serve them and are likely unsafe. Schools exist to serve children and should not be considered employment programs. This is a point that really gets me. Our government is empowered to remove a child from a neglectful home, and rightfully so. But why then isn't a family empowered to remove their child from a government-run school that is neglecting their education, or perhaps even their safety? The only means of escape for these children is if their family has enough money to move them to another school, or if they can win a seat in a charter school, or I would add the third option if they're lucky enough to get a scholarship. And what about the families whose children are enrolled in an independent school? These families are shouldering the dual burden of taxes to support public schools and tuition to support their own children's education. Why can't they get some of their own tax money back to support their own children? Some will argue that we cannot afford parental choice programs. Again, the opposite is true. We cannot afford not to enact parental choice. If you continue to support only public schools, including charter schools, instead of all of our children, we will only exacerbate the fiscal crisis that you are desperately trying to resolve, since the data clearly shows that we can educate these children at a lower cost. So, again, I would say Superman needs to carefully consider whether he wants to pray or not. Thank you.
That was super. Thank you very much. That was terrific. It is now time for you to participate, and we go on. Where's our leader? Where's Peter? Oh, Peter's off moving chairs, making noise. No, that's all right. I just wanted to be sure we're going to 10 in this session, right? Correct. Okay, let's go. So I'll ask you all a question. Why is it that academics have paid no attention to the effect on children themselves and their parents and their characters, distinguishing between those families, those parents who have choice, and those who don't have choice? As far as I know, nothing is written on the effects on the people themselves. By the way, Michelle, would you join in when you get the feeling?
I guess
Go ahead, Joe.
I think there are a couple of reasons. We had this conversation last night. I mean, I think it's a very important question of whether particularly fragile families in inner city that are dealing with lots of issues, that when you take away the ability for those parents to provide a safe and sound education, it's a further disruption to the family. And so what Jack is asking, is there a way to do research on that? My short answer is it's not an easy thing to research because you have to look at things longitudinally, but I think it's possible. The more cynical answer I have is academics don't like to ask questions they don't like the answer to. And unfortunately, academics don't like the idea of school choice, particularly when it involves aid to private and especially aid to religious schools.
Except for themselves, of course.
Yes.
Their own children.
Yeah.
I just have can you guys speak into your mic
This is Fawn Spady,
Yeah.
our vice chairman.
Yeah, if you can speak into your mic, because we are recording this, and that's how they get your sound, so bend those forward. And Neil, were we supposed to have a couple of floating mics? I think we were supposed to have two. Until we get those, if you can repeat the questions into the mic of whoever asks out there, so we can get it on the tape, that would be great.
Good. Let us turn to the audience now and ask you your pleasure about the discussion here. Which way shall we go? Is anybody ready? There's a gentleman. Who is it? Stand up and then we'll repeat the question. It's Jim. Is it Jim?
Actually,
Jim Heft. Jim Heft from USC.
To the dais to make sure people would speak into the microphone.
Oh, good.
It wasn't because I had a question. However, my name is James Heft. I'm a priest. I'm on the faculty of the University of Southern California, and I run a research institute there in Catholic traditions. I'd like to go back to the answer you just gave. response that was given by Joe. And that is that I really do think that there are certain questions that undercut many of the presuppositions of a particular discipline. And people are socialized in the academy, and I've been a part of it for over 35 years, to stay within their particular area that they can control and manipulate. And they can get expertise and grow in that area and get accolades. However, if you begin to look across the board to different areas, like Charles has, other institutions, other countries, and so on, very embarrassing questions get raised. So the broader the discussion can be, the more people that we can bring together in this movement, the greater impact I think ultimately we can have. So I just second that cynical response. It may not be conscious, people get caught in the drive, so I don't want to say it's a conscious deception, but what it is a kind of blinding that people get into, and it happens in the business world. Why didn't they call the 2008 collapse? Same sort of thing. So thank God that we've got the diversity here. We can raise the tough questions.
James Heft has praised the diversity of this audience and scorned the insularity of the academics and others who ignore it. What do you guys have something else to add, any of you? Okay, then we'll go back to the floor, but we'll get James later when we get the pictures and the movies going. Hello. Yes. Who are you?
I'm Adam Emerson with the Florida contingent that administers the tax credit scholarship.
Adam, this is Adam from Florida, and be very loud, please, Adam.
Zelman has given us some guidance, but I'm curious to see from either Professor Viteritti or Glenn, what might be the risk to the whole right of choice movement if we were to test a charter mechanism for faith-based providers and if the court were to strike it down as a constitution?
Is the question, what would happen to...
Is there any risk, or what risk might there be to the parental choice?
What are the risks of charters for values that many of you represent here? That is, for the breadth and diversity of faith-based and... Okay.
Well, actually, is there a risk to the movement overall, whether the private options or public school options, political risk or otherwise, if we were to test, say, a Catholic charter school?
It depends. I think it depends on the facts of the case.
Is there a risk in the churches taking on charter schools?
I think it depends on the facts of the case. I don't think Mike McConnell will be speaking about this later, and he's certainly an authority on this. I think that I don't think there's a big risk that this court is going to retract or move backwards on the First Amendment Establishment Clause issue. I think the question you're asking, I think, is going to turn on the facts of the case. And that's why I say there's risk involved with the way those schools are handled.
Let me add, if I may. I've been advisor to the Association of Christian Schools International, which is a big evangelical school organization. The fact is that yes, there's a risk, but going down the other road, that is not recognizing that charter schools have the wind in their sails, is really a death trip for Catholic and evangelical schools that serve moderate income families. We see it right and left, as was mentioned earlier. The growth of urban charter schools is to a large extent at the expense of schools that have been offering wonderful education at a moderate cost to children without regard to their religious membership or whatever. I think it's, so while I think it's a risk, I think it's a risk that has to be taken. And it has to be taken, however, with much more clarity about what it is that makes faith-based schools distinctive, as I tried to say. I just published an article in encyclopedia on Islamic schools in the United States. And again, the same issue there. To the extent that those schools, or Catholic schools, or evangelical schools, or Jewish schools, can manage to articulate clearly what it is that is the distinctive understanding of the world which they offer, which does not have to be reliant upon particular rituals that perhaps the court will forbid, but which is totally reliant upon the whole approach to instruction, to discipline, to school life, to everything that makes up the school. That, it seems to me, is absolutely crucial. I hate to see, I'm devastated every time I read about another Catholic school in the city of Boston or Lowell or Fall River closing. I think that's terrible. But I don't think that we are going to be able to find an answer to that through the voucher mechanism. If I'm wrong, I will be delighted. But in my view, the only mechanism that is going to be politically acceptable is the charter school mechanism. And as your question implies, that carries with it significant risks. So that there's a lot of hard work to be done by leaders in Catholic and evangelical and Islamic and Jewish and other education in really thinking through what is so essential that it must not be abandoned, and then translating that into the terms that can function within the charter school world. And let me just mention, in the Netherlands and in Belgium, 2/3 of all the children attend schools that are not operated by government. And government, being European governments, regulates them to death, unfortunately. Right? A lot of regulation about all kinds of things. But one thing they don't touch is what in Dutch is called the richting, the distinctive philosophical orientation of the curriculum. That may not be touched by government regulation. That has to be preserved. So, for example, in the Netherlands, there are 50 Islamic schools, all of which are 100% government funded,
Charles,
which are able to preserve that character, while at the same time they have to meet requirements of, accountability in all the other ways.
We just got a couple of minutes left. I'm going to see Mike Gary. He's right in my line of fire. Can John do that in 1 minute? Two. Well, we'll photograph him later, perhaps. But in any event, there's no choice here.
Can you come up here and do it?
Well, come on, John. If you're, come on. John, come on. Oh.
Come on down.
Come on, hurry.
Take this microphone.
I want to say, in response to Charlie, come on, over. Oh, okay. You want, okay. Proceed.
All right. Thank you.
Turn that way. Hold the microphone. You can lift it off.
Okay.
No.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. Again, greetings. My name is John Hirsch. I teach at Georgetown University. For a number of years now, since actually 1995, we had something called the Catholic Schools Project, where because Georgetown doesn't have a major or even a minor in education, but we have a great deal of student interest in it, we were able to have our students work in the classroom as teachers' aides in 3 different Catholic schools. as you all know, at one point, the present cardinal decided that, I think largely for financial reasons, he was no longer able to sustain the commitment that his predecessors had. And 2 of those schools were turned into charter schools. The result, candidly, was not good. Effectively, not only did, of course, their names change, because schools called Immaculate Conception or Assumption were no longer acceptable sort of to the school board or to the people in the city government who effectively funded them. But they made very many other changes too, probably too many, quite honestly, Jack, keeping in mind what you said, to go into here in any degree. But I'm not against charter schools at all, and I agree that we should have with them an alliance. But I think it's an alliance, I don't know, of equals or something like that. But the notion that charter schools can, that Catholic schools can become charter schools, there's no evidence for that whatsoever in Washington. In fact, they cease to be Catholic schools is what very, very clearly happens. And this happened with all of the schools. The number was reduced from 14 to 12 and then to 4. So there are only 4 Catholic schools that were left in the original consortium, and the others became charter schools.
John, I have to pull a plug.
Okay, sorry.
No, what do you mean, sorry? Thank you very much. That was very interesting. If Peter is here and he gives me permission for one more question. Where are you, Peter? Is it? No, that's not Peter. Is there one more? Okay, the man in the back. I'm sorry, I can't tell who you are.
Whether they would be tested? Oh, I think most places in the country right now, like in New York, I can find out the same information about students in Catholic schools that I can in public schools. They're taking the same tests. So I do think that private schools need to be much more transparent, and the bad ones need to close. You need to support the good ones. There needs to be much more transparency and accountability. And I think again, I go back to, I think, putting that in the hands of parents, so parents can actually look at a school and see how they're doing and decide, you know what, I don't want to send my child to that school. I'm going to send them over here because this one, even though it looks good, it's all nice and warm and fuzzy and cuddly, they're not actually performing at a very high level. So I'm all with, transparency, accountability, all across the board. And I don't think that's something faith-based schools have necessarily been excellent at doing in the past, but I think they're getting better, and they're going to have to if they want to be competitive.
On the button, Darla. Thank you so much. And we're done. Get some coffee.